She had inserted chest tubes in a sandstorm with a headlamp and a prayer. She had sutured femoral arteries by feel alone, buried elbow deep in a man's thigh, while enemy fire chewed through the mud wall 3 inches above her head. She had pulled 17 men back from the edge of death in places that don't exist on any map the public will ever see. But tonight, in the gleaming, climate-controlled halls of Mercy General Hospital in San Diego, she was nobody. She was just the quiet one who refilled the saline bags. The surgeon hadn't even learned her name yet. That would be his first mistake. The trauma wing at Mercy General operated on its own specific physics after midnight. Time moved differently down there, too slow during the empty hours, then violently, terrifyingly fast the moment the ambulance bay doors blew open. The fluorescent lights hummed at a frequency that burrowed into your skull after a 12-hour shift. The linoleum, bleached white and perpetually damp, reflected the overhead glare in a way that made everyone look a little bit dead. Dr. Marcus Calloway had worked this trauma wing for 9 years, and he had learned to love it the way a boxer loves the ring. Brutal, yes. Unforgiving, absolutely. But his ring, his kingdom. He was 44, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver threading through dark hair he wore slightly too long for a man of his professional stature. His hands were extraordinary. Everyone said so. Piano player hands attached to a surgeon's precision, capable of threading a suture through tissue finer than wet paper without leaving a ripple. He had the kind of quiet, unshakable confidence that read, depending on the observer, as either masterful competence or world-class arrogance. The senior surgical residents worshipped him. The nursing staff had a more complicated relationship with the man. He's brilliant. Charge nurse Patricia Okafor, a 20-year veteran with arms like a longshoreman and the moral authority of a parish priest, would say flatly whenever someone brought him up. Brilliant and completely insufferable. God clearly only had enough patience to give one great gift. It was Patricia who had noticed the new agency nurse first. She had appeared 3 weeks ago with nothing more than a completed intake form, a laminated ID badge, and a single duffel bag, dark green, military grade, the kind that had seen actual dirt. Her name on the badge read Wren, C. No full first name. No previous employer listed beyond a government contract reference that Patricia had run through the hospital's verification system twice before it came back clean with a vague federal clearance designation she had never seen before. She was 36 years old, according to her file. She looked both younger and immeasurably older than that, somehow, simultaneously. She was lean in a way that spoke not of gym memberships, but of sustained physical discipline, the kind of economy of body that comes from years of carrying weight across long distances. Her dark auburn hair was always pulled back in a tight, no-ceremony bun. Her eyes were a pale, watchful gray, the color of a winter sky 30 minutes before a storm. She moved through the trauma wing like she was navigating a room she had already mapped in her sleep. She never rushed, never froze, never dropped anything, never raised her voice. She appeared at a patient's bedside before the monitor had finished alarming, already holding exactly what was needed, her gloved hands moving with a fluid, almost unsettling efficiency. She ate alone. She never joined the resident gossip huddles around the coffee machine. She answered questions with precise, minimal words. She had the focused stillness of someone who had spent a very long time being invisible on purpose. "She makes me nervous," said Dr. Jordan Lee, the second-year surgical resident, leaning against the nurse's station one slow Tuesday night and watching the new agency nurse quietly restock a crash cart with the thoroughness of a bomb disposal technician. Not bad nervous, just like she knows something the rest of us don't. Patricia didn't look up from her charting. "Son, most people in this building know something you don't." She organized the crash cart differently, Jordan pressed. The intubation kit. She moved the pediatric blade to secondary position and put the surgical crick kit on top. I almost corrected her, and then I thought, why would someone prioritize the crick kit? Patricia finally looked up, slowly. She studied the new nurse across the hall. Someone, Patricia said carefully, who has had to cut an airway open without the luxury of a standard intubation attempt. Jordan stared at her. In what scenario does a floor nurse? Go finish your charts, Dr. Lee, Patricia said, and returned to hers. That had been 2 weeks ago. The question Patricia had swallowed down had not gone away. It sat in her chest like a stone. She just had no idea how enormous that stone would become. The call came in at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday. Not through the standard EMS dispatch line. Not through the trauma pager. The call came through the direct line into the trauma attending's office, a number printed on no public directory, and the voice on the other end of the phone was not a paramedic. Patricia took the call because Dr. Calloway was scrubbing out of an appendectomy. "Ma'am, this is Commander Alan Hurst, Naval Special Warfare Command," the voice said. It was calm, flat, and entirely devoid of anything resembling warmth. "We have a critical surgical patient inbound to your facility. ETA 11 minutes. He is a Naval Special Warfare operator. He has sustained multiple gunshot wounds, significant blast injury to the lower extremities, and a penetrating thoracic wound. Your trauma bay needs to be cleared. I mean completely cleared. Non-essential personnel out. This is a classified patient transport." Patricia had worked in this hospital for 2 decades. She had taken calls from FBI agents, from the Secret Service, from a Mexican cartel intermediary, once who had calmly offered to pay $500,000 in cash for a surgeon to treat a man with no face. She did not rattle easily. "Commander," she said, in her most deliberately pleasant voice, "I need to remind you that this is a civilian medical facility and—" "Ma'am, I understand. Your administration has already been contacted and has authorized the protocol. You'll see the authorization code on your system in approximately 40 seconds. I need Dr. Marcus Calloway prepped and in Trauma Bay 1. He needs his best surgical team, and I need everyone else out." Patricia looked at her computer screen. 40 seconds later, a federal authorization code populated across the top of her scheduling system in bold red letters she had never seen before. Below it, a single line of text. "Full cooperation required. Code Obsidian." She had never heard of Code Obsidian. She would later learn it meant the patient's identity was classified at a level that required active suppression from all civilian hospital records. By the time the armored black SUVs pulled into the ambulance bay with their lights dark and their engines barely audible, Patricia had cleared Trauma Bay 1. She had sent the residents to other floors with thin excuses. She had positioned her own most trusted nurses on the periphery. She had left the agency nurse, Wren, in the supply corridor outside the bay. Not because she trusted her less than the others. Precisely because, in the cool, calculating part of her brain that 20 years of trauma nursing had forged into something almost military, she trusted her more than anyone else on the floor. Whatever this situation turned into, Patricia had decided, without being able to articulate exactly why, she wanted that woman nearby. The man they brought in was enormous, even on the stretcher. 6'3" of pure military architecture. The kind of physical conditioning that exists at the absolute outer frontier of what human genetics will allow. His face, what was visible beneath the oxygen mask and the blood, was hard-planed and bearded, 40-something, with deep-set eyes currently closed against the pain. His hands, even slack and still, looked like they had been designed to do damage. He was wearing the remnants of a tactical uniform with no insignia, no patches, no identifying markers of any kind. 2 Navy corpsmen in plain clothes flanked the stretcher, moving with the synchronized efficiency of people who had done this before and were hoping not to have to do it again tonight. A third man walked slightly behind, Commander Hurst, presumably. He was 50s iron-gray crew cut, a jaw like a structural beam, wearing civilian clothes that fit him like a uniform anyway. His eyes swept the trauma bay in a single methodical pass and cataloged everything in it, including every person. His gaze landed on Patricia for 1 second, then moved on. It landed on the agency nurse in the supply corridor doorway for 2 full seconds before moving on. That hesitation was tiny. Patricia almost missed it. She did not miss it. "What do we have?" Calloway demanded, striding into the bay, still snapping on his second glove. "Petty officer, call him Nomad," one of the corpsmen said, handing over a handwritten medical card rather than a digital file. "Multiple GSWs, Entry and exit confirmed at right shoulder and left lateral thorax. Blast fragmentation to both lower legs, right femur likely fractured. He took a partial detonation from an IED. He was at the outer edge. Blood pressure is tanking. We pushed 2 units of ONEG in the field. He's been down for 40 minutes. Calloway scanned the card without breaking stride, already positioning himself at the patient's right side. Chest tube on the left. Give me a thoracic tray. Someone call the OR and tell them we're coming up in 15 minutes, or this man dies on my table instead of theirs. His pressure is 60 over palp. Jordan Lee reported from the monitor station, his voice admirably controlled for someone who had clearly just realized the men standing guard at the bay entrance were armed. Push another unit and give me a massive transfusion protocol running, Calloway ordered. Where's my... He turned. The instrument tray was already at his elbow, precisely positioned, every implement in perfect sequential order for a left-sided chest decompression followed by a thoracotomy assessment. The correct blade was already mounted on the scalpel handle. The chest tube, the correct size, was open and prepped. Calloway blinked. He had not heard anyone approach. He looked to his left. The agency nurse, Wren, was standing at the instrument tray, her gloved hands folded, her gray eyes level and calm. She had materialized inside the sealed trauma bay without anyone, apparently, opening the door for her. I told you cleared, Calloway said sharply, looking toward Patricia. She's my best nurse, Patricia said, from across the room, in a tone that was not a request for a debate. I don't know this woman. I don't work with people I don't know on a classified. Doctor, the voice came from the stretcher. It was barely a sound. It was scraped out of a man whose lung capacity was currently at roughly 40%, compressing further with every breath. But it was the most commanding 40% of a voice that room had ever heard. Everyone froze. The patient, Nomad, had opened his eyes. They were dark brown, glassy with pain and blood loss, but focused. Extraordinarily, impossibly focused for a man who should have been unconscious. His gaze had found the agency nurse immediately. He had not looked for her. He had simply opened his eyes and known exactly where she was, the way a compass needle finds north. For 3 seconds, he simply looked at her. Doc, he rasped toward Calloway. His voice was the sound of gravel shifting under enormous weight. Stop talking. Let her work. Calloway's jaw tightened. Sir, you are in hemorrhagic shock. You are not in a position to... She's sealed, the man whispered. The words cost him visibly. His jaw clenched against a fresh wave of pain, and he wrote it down with a controlled exhale through his nose that was itself a demonstration of extraordinary willpower. Combat diver. SEAL qualification. She was a 713 medic before she crossed over. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Patricia had ever heard in 30 years of emergency medicine. A SEAL qualification training graduate working as a night shift agency nurse. The statement was so incongruous that the brain resisted it the way the eye resists an optical illusion, insisting the reality in front of it must be a mistake. That's... Jordan Lee started, and then appeared to lose confidence in whatever he had been about to say. Calloway looked at the woman standing at his instrument tray. Really looked at her, for the first time, in the way a surgeon looks at a problem he has to actually solve rather than simply dominate. She hadn't moved. She hadn't reacted to the dying man's words with surprise or embarrassment or confirmation. She was simply standing there, watching the patient's chest rise and fall with the too shallow, too rapid rhythm of a compromised lung, her gray eyes running the same cold, continuous assessment they always ran. Is that true? Calloway demanded. She looked at him. Your patient's pressure just dropped another 10 points, she said. You can ask me questions, or you can open his chest. I'd recommend the chest. Her name was not Wren. That was the first thing Commander Hurst confirmed 45 minutes later, when Nomad was in surgery and Hurst had pulled Patricia into the small family consultation room adjacent to the bay and closed the door with the quiet, inexorable finality of a vault. Her name is Chief Petty Officer Cara Maddox, Hurst said. He placed a tablet on the table between them. On the screen was a military personnel photograph, the same face, younger, harder, in a tactical uniform with no rank on display, but a cluster of qualification badges below the left pocket that Patricia couldn't fully read. Retired. Honorably. 18 months ago. Patricia stared at the photograph. She was a SEAL. She completed SEAL qualification training as part of an integrated assessment program that doesn't officially exist, Hearst said. She was embedded with Naval Special Warfare for 6 years as a Special Operations Combat Medic and Direct Action Specialist. She holds qualifications in combat diving, halo insertion, close quarters battle, advanced trauma life support, surgical assist, field improvised medicine, and 2 others I'm not going to list in a civilian facility. Patricia absorbed this. Her face stayed neutral only through considerable professional effort. What is she doing here? Patricia asked. As an agency nurse? Hearst was quiet for a moment. He looked at the door. She knows the patient, he finally said. The man on your table. They worked together. 3 deployments. The last one, he stopped. A muscle moved in his jaw. The last one went wrong. Badly wrong. There was a mission compromise in a location I cannot name. Our team was surrounded. We were looking at catastrophic casualties. He paused. Maddox carried him 4 kilometers through active contact to an exfil point. 4 kilometers. In the dark. With a tourniquet on his leg, she had applied, one-handed while returning fire with the other. Patricia closed her eyes for 1 second. She saved his life, Hearst said. She saved 3 lives that night. And when she got them out, when the mission was finally over and the debrief was done, she walked out of Naval Special Warfare Command and she did not come back. She said she was done. Said she wanted to save lives without having to take them first. So she became a nurse, Patricia said quietly. She was always a nurse, Hearst said. His voice had shifted into something that was not quite grief, but lived in the same neighborhood. That's what Cara Maddox has always been. The operators who knew her really knew her. They didn't call her by her call sign in the field. You know what they called her? Patricia waited. Doc, Hearst said. Just document same as every other SEAL medic in history. Because that's how they saw her. Not as a shooter. Not as a door kicker. She was the one who put them back together. And there were suite 2 floors above them. Dr. Marcus Calloway was operating on a man whose life had already been saved once tonight before he even reached the surgical table. He knew this because of what he had seen in the trauma bay. Calloway was not a man given to professional humility. He had earned his arrogance brick by brick over 2 decades of extraordinary surgical outcomes. He had a wall in his office with letters from patients, from generals, from a senator who owed him a functional right hand. He did not, as a rule, feel outmatched in a trauma bay. He had felt outmatched tonight. Not dramatically. Not in a way that embarrassed him in the moment. It was subtler than that. The particular discomfort of realizing incrementally that the person standing across the operating table from you has been to places the medicine you practiced had never needed to go. When he had made the incision for the left chest tube, the patient's pressure had dropped catastrophically. 50 over palp. The bleeding was internal, faster than expected, and the thoracic cavity was filling. Jordan Lee had made a sound that was not quite a word. The corpseman by the door had tightened his grip on his rifle stock without shooting anything, which was the only form of helplessness available to him. Ren, Maddox, had been at the instrument tray. She had not panicked. She had done something Calloway had never seen in a civilian hospital. She had looked at the monitor, looked at the patient's color, looked at the rate of blood pooling in the suction canister, and done the math and the time it takes to exhale. She had placed a second suction line in his hand before he reached for it. She had already opened the thoracotomy kit. She had repositioned the light with her free hand to give him the exact angle he needed as he worked. She had done all of this without being asked, without verbal cues. She read the surgery the way a musician reads the room, not from the sheet music, but from the living, breathing thing unfolding in front of her. At one point, when the bleeding had found a source he couldn't immediately visualize, she had said, quietly, subclavian posterior surface. 3 centimeters. He had looked. She had been correct to within a centimeter. How did you? He had started. Blast pattern, she had said. Entry wound, angle, plus the blood pressure curve. The math points posterior. You can tell me I'm wrong in about 30 seconds. He could not tell her she was wrong, because she was not wrong. There was one other moment. The moment that Calloway would not discuss with anyone for a long time afterward. Not because it was medically inexplicable. It was not, quite, but because of what it cost him to admit what he had seen. When the patient's heart had stuttered into a non-perfusing rhythm at the 12-minute mark, when a monitor had produced that long, terrible, flat drone, and Jordan had called it, and Calloway's hands had moved automatically toward the internal paddles. Maddox had placed 2 fingers on the patient's neck, directly, bare contact. She had pressed, not in the location of a standard carotid pulse check. She had pressed in a specific place, at a specific angle, with a specific sustained pressure that Calloway did not recognize from any technique he had been taught. "What are you doing?" he had demanded, even as he positioned the paddles. "Vagal stimulation, modified," she had said. "He's in VFib secondary to hypoxic spasm, not primary arrhythmia. His conduction system is intact. If you shock him now, you risk converting him to asystole." She had pressed harder, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on the monitor. "Give me 15 seconds. That is not a recognized technique for her. Give me 15 seconds, doctor." 9 seconds later, the monitor had stuttered. Then a blip, then a second blip, then a third. Sinus rhythm. Fragile, rate of 42, but sinus rhythm. Calloway had stood with the paddles in his hands and looked at the monitor and then at this woman, this agency nurse he had wanted to throw out of his trauma bay 40 minutes ago. "Where?" he said finally. "Did you learn that?" She had not answered. She had handed him the next instrument and nodded toward the surgical field, and he had understood, without further discussion, that the question would have to wait. Nomad. His name, his real name, was Chief Petty Officer Ryan Taggart. And that was the name Hearst gave Patricia along with everything else, because by then the walls were coming down, and there was little point in the architecture of secrecy inside a building that already knew too much, had been conscious for fragments of the night. He had been conscious when they loaded him into the vehicle. He had been conscious, barely, when the bay doors opened and the fluorescent lights hit him like a physical blow. And he had been conscious in a particular crystal clear way that extreme blood loss sometimes produces right before the brain begins its shutdown sequence, when he opened his eyes and found her. He would tell Patricia about it later. 3 days later, when he was in the ICU with 4 units of blood in him and a chest tube and a repaired subclavian artery and a femur held together with titanium hardware, and he was awake and thinking and had that specific expression of a man who has been very close to a door he did not walk through. "I knew she was here," he said. His voice was still rough, rebuilt from the damage. "Before I opened my eyes. I knew." "How?" Patricia asked. He thought about it. You spend 6 years working with someone in the dark, in terrible places. You learn how a room feels when they're in it. He looked at the ceiling. Maddox has this stillness. When everyone else is spinning out, she goes still. And the room around her goes still too. I've been in firefights where I couldn't hear anything, couldn't see anything, and I could always find her because she was the still point. Whatever was happening, she was the still point. Patricia sat with that. "She carried you," Patricia said. 4 kilometers. Taggart was quiet for a long moment. His jaw moved like he was working something loose. "She carried Marcus Diaz first," he said finally. "Diaz was the worst. Tourniquet failure, internal bleeding. He had maybe 20 minutes. She got him to the exfil, handed him off, and came back for me." He paused. "She came back, Patricia, through the same ground she just crossed. That's not a medic doing her job. That's," he stopped. "What is it?" Patricia asked softly. "It's someone who decided a long time ago that the people she's responsible for don't get left behind," he said. "Not because she was trained to, because she physically cannot do it. It would break something in her that nothing else has managed to break." His eyes were wet. He did not appear embarrassed by this. "I've known hard people my whole life. The hardest people I've ever known. Maddox is the hardest of them. And the most," he searched for the word. "She's the most present. Every time. Doesn't matter what's coming at her. She is entirely there." At 6:15 a.m., with the gray San Diego dawn pressing softly against the hospital windows, Dr. Marcus Calloway found Cara Maddox in the small staff break room on the trauma floor. She was sitting at the corner table with both hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee, not drinking it, just holding the heat. The room was empty except for her. He sat down across from her. He did not bring coffee. He had not slept. He had the look of a man who had been running calculations in his head for the past 3 hours and was not satisfied with any of the answers. "Taggart is stable," he said. "I know," she said. "Patricia texted me. You saved his life before he reached my table," Calloway said. "In the bay. The vagal maneuver. If you hadn't done that, I'd have shocked him and we'd have lost him." He said it flatly, as a fact. It clearly cost him nothing and everything simultaneously. She looked at him over the cup. "You would have figured it out," she said. "You're a good surgeon." "I'm a great surgeon," he said, with no particular vanity in it, just professional inventory. "But I don't know that technique." "Where did you learn it?" "A doctor in Khyber province," she said. "Retired Pakistani army. He was working with a humanitarian organization. He called it a legacy pressure method. He learned it from someone who had learned it during the Soviet-Afghan War." Calloway absorbed this. "You learned trauma medicine from wherever it was," she said simply. "From whoever had it. Textbooks are written in rooms. Medicine happens in places that aren't rooms." She set the cup down. "I learned from the best people I ever met, most of whom never had a medical license and would not have known what to do with one." He was quiet for a moment. "You should be in a surgical residency," he said. "What you can do, the assessment speed, the manual precision, the ability to read a case without imaging. You have more clinical instinct than anyone I've trained in 9 years." "I'm exactly where I want to be," she said. "Pushing saline and restocking crash carts." The question wasn't cruel. It was genuinely confused. "Keeping people alive," she said. "The title doesn't matter." It never mattered. She looked out the window at the lightning sky. "I spent 6 years in places where the title was whatever was needed. Surgeon, medic, anesthesiologist, dentist, combat swimmer, and occasionally a thing with a rifle I'm not going to talk about in a break room. The title was never the point." She paused. "The point was always the same. The person in front of me. What do they need? How do I give it to them? Everything else is noise." Calloway sat back. He had conducted this conversation expecting to feel like the person with authority, with institutional knowledge, with the architecture of professional credentialing behind him. He felt, instead, like a man standing in a room where the ceiling had been quietly removed sometime in the past few hours, and he was only just noticing the sky. "I told you to get out of my trauma bay," he said. "Yes," she said. "I called you," he paused. "Just a nurse," she said. "Yes." He looked at his hands. The extraordinary, lauded, gifted hands that had put Taggart's subclavian artery back together 3 hours ago. "I apologize," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Her pale eyes were entirely without rancor, not forgiving him so much as declining to have ever required the apology in the first place. "The patient is alive," she said. "That's what matters." Commander Alan Hurst left the hospital at 7 in the morning with his 2 corpsmen and a folder of paperwork that erased most of the night's official record. He shook Patricia's hand at the ambulance bay door. He gave her a card with a phone number on it and told her that if she ever needed anything, and that the definition of anything was intentionally broad, she should call. He paused at the door. "Turn back." "Maddox," he said. "You know why she left." Patricia waited. "It wasn't the combat," he said. "She could handle the combat. She's handled things in the field that would have retired a lesser person 10 years earlier." He looked at the gray morning sky. It was the paperwork, the after-action reports, documenting what we did to the people we were doing it to. "She told me once," he stopped, started again. "She told me that she became a medic because she believed the most important thing a human being could do was keep another human being alive. And she started to feel like the work, the operational work, was undermining that equation. More people leaving on her stretcher than arriving. So she chose a hospital," Patricia said. "She chose the math that made sense to her," Hurst said. "More in than out. Every shift. That's Maddox." He walked to the vehicle. Patricia stood at the bay door in the thin, early light, watching the black SUVs pull away in silence. Behind her, somewhere in the trauma wing, Cara Maddox was already beginning her second consecutive shift because 3 of the agency nurses had called out sick and someone needed to stay, and she had volunteered without being asked, as she always did. 3 months later, the story had spread through Mercy General in the way that true stories spread through hospitals, quietly, in fragments, told in hushed voices in break rooms, in supply corridors, and the long, carpeted stretch of hallway outside the ICU where people came to collect themselves before going back to work. Not the classified parts. Those stayed classified, but the shape of the night. The agency nurse who stepped into a trauma bay and told one of the best surgeons in the state which vessel was bleeding before he could see it. The woman who brought a man's heart back with her hands when the paddles were already charged. The quiet one who ate alone and never talked about herself, and somehow always seemed to arrive at the right bedside at the right moment, a fraction of a second ahead of the crisis, as if she could hear catastrophe approaching from a different frequency than everyone else. Dr. Jordan Lee, who had been there and would be dining out on the story for the rest of his residency, told it slightly differently each time. The core never changed. The detail sharpened and sometimes softened depending on the audience. But the ending was always the same. The part that always stopped the room. And the dying SEAL opened his eyes, Jordan would say, leaning slightly forward over whatever hospital cafeteria table he was holding court at. He had about 30 minutes of blood left in him. He was done. We all knew he was done. And he opens his eyes, finds her across the room, and he tells Calloway to stand down. Here, Jordan would pause, for maximum effect. And Calloway says, "Who is she?" And the SEAL, Jordan would lower his voice. The SEAL looks at him, and he says, "You have no idea who she is." The room always went quiet at this point. So the newest resident or medical student or visiting fellow would invariably ask, "Who was she?" Jordan would smile. "She's our night shift nurse," he would say. "She's here every Tuesday and Thursday. She makes terrible coffee, and she reorganizes the crash carts, and she will absolutely see you before you see her." He paused, and she was a SEAL medic who once carried a man 4 kilometers through a hot landing zone. And she knows a heart resuscitation technique from the Soviet-Afghan War that isn't in any textbook I've ever seen. And she chose this. He gestured at the linoleum, the fluorescent lights, the relentless ordinary heroism of the place. She chose here. Every shift. On purpose. Another pause. So the next time you think about walking past the nursing staff on your way to something important, Jordan said, looking specifically at whoever among his listeners had shown up to the hospital with the sheen of fresh entitlement still on them, you might want to ask yourself what they left behind to be standing in that hallway. Down the corridor, in Trauma Bay 1, Cara Maddox was restocking the crash cart. She worked in the efficient, unhurried silence that was just her natural frequency. She checked the defibrillator charge. She confirmed the epinephrine vials against the inventory sheet. She repositioned the surgical crit kit to the top of the intubation tray, where it would be immediately accessible when, not if, someone needed an airway opened in a hurry. She could hear laughter from somewhere down the hall. The day shift was arriving. The particular energy of morning, the coffee and the handoffs and the brief bright window before the chaos reconstituted itself, was moving through the building the way weather moves. She finished the card. She snapped the inventory sheet onto the clipboard and moved toward the door. She paused at the threshold. On the wall beside Trauma Bay 1, someone had stuck a small handwritten card. It was not an official hospital notice. It was written in neat, deliberate block letters on a prescription pad page, the kind that gets grabbed in a hurry. It read, "This room was the site of something extraordinary. The people in it did not all get credit for what they did. Some of them never will." Patricia's handwriting. Cara recognized it. She stood there for a moment, reading it. Her face was still. Her eyes moved through whatever the words did to the interior of a person who had decided, a long time ago, that credit was not the point. Then she reached up and took the card off the wall. She folded it carefully in half. She put it in the pocket of her scrubs. She walked back into the hallway and went to work. The monitor in Bay 4 was alarming. The morning was beginning. Doc was in the building. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that the most extraordinary people in any room are sometimes the quietest ones, hit that like button and share it with someone who deserves to hear it. Subscribe for more stories about the heroes hiding in plain sight. They are everywhere. You just have to learn how to look.